This land is alive. It is supportive. It is ancient and cool, wet and west and clear. It is dark soil and heavy clouds. Birdsong, twisting, anchoring. I am moved from the brim to the base. It is worth cherishing, sitting with, hoping for, holding by. Our story starts with a stream.
Sally, my dear, oh, I wish I could bid you. She smiled and replied, and you'd say I misled you. If all the young men with hairs on.
Up on Dartmoor, 365 square miles of highland, granite rock piles form the skyline, the ground laden with gorsebush, bracken and heather. This place holds magic, a common feeling shared of entering another world, where the past and present collide, where members of alternate realms reside. Pixies, ghosts, wise wizards and witches, there still remains tall and heavy evidence of an ancient wisdom tradition. Stone circles laid in the ground by Neolithic communities to commemorate the earth, the mother, who represents abundance, fertility. The land was the source, and Dartmoor remains preserved in this potent time of animism, as the world outside seems to stray further from these fundamental beliefs. Its peat soils have never been cultivated, so the story goes that the spirit of the moor would rip the pockets of any man who scratched its back. The stream runs on, tumbling and winding, life sprouting along its banks. The water widens as it moves down from the highland and into a valley. The river has a name. It is defined. The Dart. 6 miles down south, it cuts through Totnes, brave and brown now, heading toward the sea. It carries with it legends and that ancient, grumbling life force. Bridges stretch across the Dart as settlers inhabit the valley, with Totnes itself built on myth. It is said that Brutus of Troy, the legendary founder of Britain, first landed in this town, and the stone where he placed his foot and declared, "Here I stand and here I rest, I call this town Totnes," still rests on this high street. The river is transition. Its water is change. Adaptable, forceful, fluid. Beneath the town, the leech well springs continue to flow. It's said that those suffering from leprosy once came here to bathe, believing in the medicinal power of the waters. Blurring the lines between reality and legend, stories stand as a way to visualize, empathize, connect. They are the way we know each other, the way we pass on learning and traditions. They also provide as an anchor and a way to understand something as we try to make sense of it. And in trying to understand, we are also learning to love. Love is understanding. It's about seeing the unique spirit of a place, of a person, a moment, seeing it as a whole, within its history, its systems, and the stories that make it. A story of place, then, becomes a story of love.
For love and companionship, you would wear my biggest crown, and I wear your regalia. I wear your regalia. We jump around and think that we, and yes we are. We're really.
In 907 AD, Totnes was made as an Anglo-Saxon fortified settlement, chosen as it allowed crossing of the river to defend against Viking attacks. By the 12th century, Totnes had grown into a bustling market town, thriving thanks to its proximity to the moorlands wool industry and the River Dart, which connected it to both the sea and to inland trade.
Well, moving in to your old age, living on a state pension, you've got to save. Austerity leads to an early grave. Make it ends meet. Austerity, they say.
It was in Totnes in 2006 that the Transition Town movement was first launched as a response to the climate emergency and peak oil crisis. We must transition from unsustainable consumption to localised, self-sustaining, supportive systems, reducing reliance on the global economy. In response, a grassroots movement is necessary. Can individual change and local action help redesign society? Transition Town Totnes is a community-led initiative providing practical support for local residents to take action in response to global crisis. Through participatory and educational projects, it promotes a low-carbon, sustainable and resilient society. The ethos of Transition Town is to empower communities to become more resilient in imaginative, connected ways. We're intrinsically linked to place, yet our relationship with it is so often overlooked, rendered invisible by modern living or fragmented by disconnection. What does it mean to not only live in a place, but to live with it? To cultivate belonging, not just through shared geography, but through shared story, shared soil, shared care. In exploring the idea of place and the importance of models like the Transition Town movement within a community, I spoke with Guy, who is involved with Transition Town Totnes.
Sorry, your connection to Transition Town?
Yeah. So growing up in Totnes, I was about sort of 10 years old or so when transition first got started, and was sort of peripherally it was in my consciousness that it was around, even though I was never directly engaging with it. My first sort of interaction would have been having Totnes pounds and occasionally using them, but not really understanding where they came from, or that they were just sort of a cute gimmick for me as a kid. and then and then there was an associated project by an aligned organisation called Encounters Arts that worked with Transition Town Totnes to run this project called Little Patch of Ground, which was doing taking a sort of half-acre piece of land at the Dartington Hall estate and running it as like a creative design, but also permaculture course almost for this patch of land. And my mum actually got me connected with that when I was about 14, 15. And so I went along this journey of seeing how this sort of tiny piece of ground on Dartington could be transformed, and at the same time learning about transition principles and the sort of the wider ethos of sustainability. And then my first like direct TTT link was when I was about 18 or so. I got involved with the local food festivals that were running. With TTT had the previous year run this thing called the Local Economic Blueprint, which was basically looking at the four key economic sectors of the town and looking at sort of what's the potential there, what needs to be networking better, what's potential for strengthening the local economy by putting investment in different areas, and then they noticed things about the potential for strengthening the local food economy and how much of an impact just like a 10% pledge, 10% of your weekly food shop going towards businesses that are producing within 30 miles of Totnes, how many millions of pounds a year that would help strengthen the local economy. And so that was the sort of theory, and then the action or the excessive inroad was through the local food festivals, and so I got involved in that, and yeah, and then that's sort of that's where it all probably started, and then I sort of dipped in and out in sort of typical ways when there was energy for it, and I found things to be engaged with, and then one thing led to another, and I ended up actually in a paid role in TTT, which I've been in for 2 years now.
What impact did seeing those things have on you, if you can remember at all?
I think it was the first thing that gave me an insight into what activism is in a more layered context.
Yeah.
Growing up, my sort of idea of trying to create change was probably that it was all high-level systemic law change, on a sort of policy and governance legal level, which is why my interest was originally with getting into environmental law, which is what I ended up doing my degree in. But it was through interacting with TTT that I realised that actually activism and creating change happens on multiple levels, and as theory and TTT in transition sort of pushes towards, is that a key tipping point is at a community level and at a network community level, and so that's where I really it clicked for me, and I realised that's where I think my best energy is. That's where I should put my best. That's where I'm best placed in aligning my ethos to direct work.
You found a way that transition towns almost fit your specific niche. Do you feel like that is something that transition town offers?
Yes, yeah. I think transition for a lot of people is their first inroad into activism, or at least an insight into, even if it's not obvious at the intervention that you're meeting it, it's the realization that in being involved in local food projects or doing incredible edible gardening or whatever it is, these are all steps which connect to a wider whole, and that had a really big influence on me, and it was just that kind of that sort of systems thinking explanation that really captivated me, that helped me understand how one level of action influences another, and how you need to be thinking on this kind of town level scale and how impactful that can be.
Transition town has had schemes that have come along, and then gone, and there's been many seasons, many fluctuations. How do you think the model in itself kind of holds or has space for those seasons? Because there's a lot of change, inevitably.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's transition as a movement has been able to nicely maintain its grassroots um, principles and ethos, and by being able to mold itself and move with where the energy is. So even when it's done larger sort of planned programs of work that have created outputs like Energy Descent Action Plan, it's not, sort of tied itself too strongly to that if the energy moves a different way. And especially incorporating in a transition work throughout. The things that the early team brought into that did a lot of wonderful work in helping create it as a flexible, learning organisation at the same time.
What is inner transition?
Inner transition is basically the side of um, transition work which is about looking at how we are internally responding to the challenges that we're doing and how we're monitoring our own resilience whilst if we're trying to create more resilient systems, we should be focusing on internal resilience at the same time, and that manifests in a variety of different ways, but most pertinently is just the ethos of how the organisation and the movement, how it cares for itself at the same time. So whether that's like how you hold a meeting or how you bring awareness to the stresses that the work brings. Sometimes it's tangible things like creating a mentor scheme, so by linking up with local people who are trained in physiotherapy and psychotherapy, that they can provide free sessions with people who are in transition, who are volunteering, finding it difficult, these sorts of things. There's many different ways that inner transition manifests, but that's its basic theme. Was when a lot of work at the start was about creating action, it was very sort of maybe masculine in sort of the doing. There were a lot of brilliant people who came with psychotherapy backgrounds that were like, this is going to crash, like this is going to burn out and just be another movement that trips itself over if we're not bringing in these inner resilience workings. And yeah, I think transition as a movement owes a lot to its longevity by that. That's why there's a head and a heart and a hand side of things, and that the group was originally called Heart and Soul because it was seen that there's the head, there's the heart, and there's the hands, but there was something still that was a bit missing from the theory of transition.
Yeah. What does the word transition mean? What are we transitioning to and from?
It's like always. This is one of those things that it's always slightly changing.
Yeah.
For me. I think overarchingly it's a transition of culture into one that's just in balance within the natural world. I think that's basically at its core, and that partly means a transition to systems which are less destructive, and partly that's a transition to social systems which are more responsive and caring. But overall, I think it's why the initial blogs and things that were written were called transition culture, because that's fundamentally what it's about. There was an awareness at some point that this was initially about people and direct environmental activism, but it became clear that this is all within a big social. This is about social systems. This is about ecological systems. This is about biodiversity systems. And so, in its broadest sense, it's just about transitioning a culture towards one that finds a balance, finds a harmony with the systems that we're living in.
This is a movement of return to a way of operating before globalization, when knowledge of specific place was inbuilt, before the rhythm of life was dictated by external, distant forces. This is a movement of return to rooted connection to one's local environment. The way back home is practical solutions. The simple act of the incredible edible garden scheme that Transition Town set up, where small pre-existing planters are used to grow salad, herbs and other seasonal produce, free for all to access, as well as fruit and nut trees in public places around the town. This is a great example of how small solutions make an impact. We need not look further than the patch on the end of the street as an opportunity to connect to our neighbours, to learn how to grow, to provide and nurture our community. To me, these growing spaces are a symbol.
All the young men with hairs on the mountain. How many young girls would grab guns and go hunting? If all you young men sung like blackbirds and thrushes. If all you young men sang like blackbirds and thrushes. How many young
I am asking myself what it means to belong. Let the answer be lifelong and ever transitioning.
If all